do. This is what, as Jennifer said, this is what I do as part of my gut. This is what I feel I should be doing in the classroom, and this is something that needs to be researched, and vice versa. We'd love to have that discussion. So, I'll open the floor.
And our presenters on the opposite side of the room, so.
It's like a tennis match. I do have a question. Going back to the poem, the Kanye West. Yeah, I could probably read it aloud. I could get through it, but didn't, just have my old white lady kind of perspective on it. So you need both. You need that fluency, that decoding or whatever, but you also need the context. So which comes first? If you're talking, and I want to ask the classroom teachers, the elementary kid teachers, which comes first? Do the kids need to know the decoding and could they exhibit a fluency of reading through a piece of text, whether or not they know the context? Or do you have to build context first and then kind of go back and make sure they know how to decode the words? I've taught secondary all my life, and so the kids tend to come to middle and high school at least knowing how to get through a passage typically, even if they don't have the context. So what's first? What's the better way to do it?
I don't think either can be taught in isolation from the other.
But then how do you contextualize for first graders, second graders? How do you do that if they don't have, or if they come with the limited, or they're immigrants to the country, or they don't have what they need in that regard? I mean, do you teach that too, or how do you pull that in? I don't know, it's fascinating to me.
We look at a lot of the literature that we have at our school and on our grade level. They need to have the experiences, the understanding to get the meaning. So we do a lot through reading and explaining and showing and demonstrating and hands-on.
You're saying that so nice, I feel like.
Can I add a little bit with that also?
Yeah.
I think also with the reading, there's a lot of the oral read alouds that's going on to help build that background knowledge to bridge any areas of need.
Right.
If they're coming to the schools without a lot of background knowledge due to coming from another country, then finding a read aloud to help bridge that gap, that would be another way. Just as the primary teacher, I taught 5th grade.
Okay.
So I am grateful for, and I'm a reading recovery trained teacher, but I did not like the primary students because they did not come ready for me.
Right.
So I applaud you for doing that. But just as they said, you have to teach the comprehension and the decoding together. And so as you're teaching the decoding, you're also bringing in that comprehension piece. And with the read alouds and integrating a lot of different content areas. That's another way to help bridge that gap.
I would also add to that, while you were going through the exercise, figure out what would you have liked to do first, and then also know that one day or 1 year it may work one way, and then you get a whole set of kids and say work another way.
Another thing that can happen is that grade level teachers, primary or intermediate or as the case may be, say at the end of a school year, and they're thinking back to what patterns of readiness their students were showing, and they're preparing for the following academic year. And so what they're doing with that is in their grade level teams, they're almost doing a brainstorming of how is it that we have looked at certain objectives that we knew we had to cover, so that we really know that we have a strong mastery, which we can't take for granted, of what it is that we have to teach and cover at a given grade level. And so we're really dealing with that, as well as the skills and sub-skills in there. But then along with that, they're also looking at what is it that we have learned about the readiness or lack of readiness of our learners. In other words, if we were to really think about it, articulate what we have learned about our kindergarten, our first grade learners, our second grade learners, in terms of who they are as learners, what their environments seem to be informing them or not informing them. What is it that we can become more fluent about in terms of understanding the culture of being a first grader, the culture of being a second and third grader. And so now we have 2 sets of data. We've got the data that is fully informed about what it is that we're quote unquote covering. And we have more data, more in-depth data about who our learners are. And then collectively, we're able to make better decisions about, when I think about what I want to be covering in September, what are some considerations, what are some anticipatory sets, what are some readiness, what are some warm-ups that are going to help me make decisions about, should I go with decoding first, should I go with the experience first? So it's almost like an active, an action research approach in retrospect to being able to think more holistically, and yet in terms of specific skills, how is it that we can now use those two sets of data to do short-term and long-term planning for our pedagogy decisions, let alone the content? So that's something else that comes
It's
to
that
mind.
bridge again.
Yes.
We're back.
Yes, and it's not just unilateral, because you're saying, okay, we're all primary teachers, kindergarten, first, second, third, what insights can we bring to our practice based on those two sets of data?
Well, and it seems to me that
Yeah.
the example you just gave is a beautiful example for orchestration, don't you think, Jen? That kind of, really
Okay.
fits very nicely, I think.
Let me ask a question. I'm sitting here with my math hat on, which is kind of where I live most of the time.
Yeah.
And I saw that Jennifer had as one of her recommendations that we needed more research on reading literacy across the conjugate fields, conjugate areas, and she had mathematics in particular. And I know Regina and I have talked about this just a little bit. What happens in her school, does the math teacher ever talk with the English teacher around the area of reading, right, reading and mathematics? But I'd like to know about, some of you are teaching earlier grades, what stance is taken now in the earlier grades in terms of choosing reading materials and so forth? Do you use a lot of early number books and things of that nature? If so, to what extent do you do more than read? Do you have to pull the math out of the books with the kids? Or, I mean, what do you do? And I mean, I've got a second grade grandson right now who is reading quite well, and he does good math with me, but I'm not sure he puts the two things together. So I'm trying to understand a little bit. What are you doing in early grades? And I know there are just tons of reading books that are math on the market. Are you doing much of that out there now, or you might call them math books that are readers? I mean, they're early books with numbers and math ideas, all kind of stuff in them. Are these part of your supply of materials in your classrooms, and do kids engage with those, or what do you do?
We're required now by the county to teach so many minutes of math. And it's very hard to fit it in without integrating it. And so there's lots of ways to integrate it into the language arts. And a lot of the books that we use for reading lend themselves to being integrated with math, with numbers and combining sets and identifying shapes, and then getting them to write about the process of their thinking as they solve math problems, which very few first graders in September can do, but by June they're sure doing it. How did you figure that out? Justify your answer in writing. We are integrating language arts and math to a much greater extent than was ever done before, and I think it's a very good thing.
And does that continue? I mean, your first grade.
In our school, it certainly does. We're in a darn good school.
And our librarian checks with us to see if there are certain different types of literacy books that we would want cross-curriculum that we don't have already, so that we have a good selection of math stories. Plus, I go to the library every month, and I get out books because our math manual also has, at the beginning of each chapter, many different books to do for reading and math. So,
do you use a reading program in your school year?
in Prince George's County, we have a specific reading program set up.
And you're still able to integrate the math and reading?
Well, what do you mean by reading program?
Do you have
A separate
I thought, Hoot Mifflin, do you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you are.
Yeah.
Because I know when I first started, it was easier to integrate, and we had those books with reading and math integrated. But that was during whole language time. You know, I don't see it as much now as I did 16 years ago, because whole language was not taught effectively. But so you all are able to do that.